Okay. Thank you. Do it. Shall we start? On behalf of the IOI family, I extend to all you present or online a heartfelt welcome to this special seminar celebrating the 50th anniversary of the creation of IOI by the legendary Elizabeth Borghese in response to the courageous challenge of Arvid Pardo, a son of Malta, as he addressed the world community through the UN General Assembly. That message calling on the UN to embark on drafting a constitution for the ocean in the form of a United Nations Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, to govern the largest part of our planet, including its deep hidden secrets as common heritage of humankind. Over the 50 years, progress was made and much remains to be accomplished to save our planet with a sustainable ocean, which demands a unique human compact to prevail. Over time, ingredients for an effective multilateral cooperation lost its momentum, and the desirable collaboration appears to have reached a very worrisome standstill. In recent time, the fog of aspirations and achievement has derailed those enlightened common commitments that were the core of Pardo Elizabeth's legacy. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres echoed the sentiments of Prime Minister Motley of Barbados that the global order is not working. It's not delivering, he said. The world is on the edge of an abyss with unsustainable inequalities and feckless leadership. While multilateral cooperation lost its momentum and the required level of collaboration is in a deathly standstill, distinguished speakers, the class of 2022 and guests, your presence is evidence that the enduring and unique human construct and legacy. I now invite Antonella Vassallo, Managing Director of IOI, Dean of the Blue Economy, and Guardian of the Legacy, to moderate and introduce our distinguished panelists.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Auni. As always, distinguished speakers and guests, it gives me great pleasure to be here today during this IOI special seminar, where we will consider some aspects of the seminar thesis, Ocean Governance, a Legacy Interrupted. So a warm welcome to our speakers and to our guests who join us in person in Malta and online through our internet link. So the year 2022 was touted as an ocean super year, with high expectations based on the outcomes of several large ocean-related meetings and events held this year. Together, our speakers shall be assessing this from their different areas of expertise and in the light of recent developments in the ocean agenda over this past year, which is now coming to an end. On behalf of the international family of the International Ocean Institute, who I represent over here in my capacity as Managing Director, I am honored to say a few modest words to this gathering. Permit me to describe briefly the IOI and to illustrate to you the importance and linkage of today's topic to the IOI mission and vision. The IOI was founded by Elizabeth Mann Borghese in 1972. We are an international, non-governmental, not-for-profit organization with special consultative status at the UN. Forgive me for describing the IOI again to many of you who might know us already, but I'm sure that with us today, we welcome on our seminar, on our webinar link, people who might not know this. Most importantly, the IOI works through global annual programs. And we do this work to uphold and expand the principle of the common heritage of humankind, as enshrined in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The IOI operates globally via an international network of centers, focal points, training course alumni, and partnerships, strategic partnerships with the aim of creating knowledgeable future leaders in ocean governance. And the programs are supported by the IOI Secretariat or headquarters in Malta, where I am based. The history of the IOI is very closely intertwined with that of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and that of Malta, a small nation with a long maritime history. And this is through the fruitful collaboration and friendship of two key people. One of these persons was Elizabeth Mann Borghese, who founded the IOI, and the other is Arvid Pardo. Ambassador Pardo was Malta's first permanent representative to the UN in 1964. And as you are probably aware, he is recognized most especially for his contribution to the development of the Law of the Sea. His vision was based on two fundamental principles. Firstly, that all aspects of ocean space are interrelated and should be treated as an integral whole. And secondly, that the seabed beyond national jurisdiction and its resources are the common heritage of humankind, a striking departure from earlier thinking on ocean space. Elizabeth herself was a passionate campaigner for a world order founded on distributive justice, and therefore on the doctrine of common heritage, as espoused with her good friend Arvid Pardo. To her, the sea offered the best laboratory for the application of a set of ethical principles which would guide humanity to the equitable use of natural resources. She instituted the Pacem in Maribus Conference series in 1970 and the IOI 2 years later. In 2022, the ocean community celebrates important anniversaries in the history of maritime affairs, as well as major milestones of the IOI's foundation and mission for equitable ocean governance. So in 2022, it's 55 years since Malta, through Ambassador Arvid Pardo, called upon the members of the United Nations to undertake a reform of the Law of the Sea in 1967. It's the 50th anniversary of the IOI, but it is also 40 years since the adoption of UNCLOS by the Third United Nations Conference on the Law of the Sea in 1982, and the opening for signature of the convention. These developments, taken together, had far-reaching consequences towards the implementation of sound ocean stewardship principles and the peaceful use of the ocean, underlined by the principle of the common heritage. The international ocean governance framework, built on principles of social and environmental equity, now, more than ever, face formidable challenges brought forward by multiple drivers and actors with contradictory priorities. Matters of pressing urgency to the international ocean community include the impacts of climate change, population pressures, economic globalization, the unsustainable exploitation of marine resources, and the threat of biodiversity collapsed amongst the other challenges. Humankind's reluctance to cooperate nationally, regionally, and internationally is further dwarfed by the scale of the challenges we face, which seem to be as vast as the ocean herself. It is clear that these challenges need both immediate decision-making and wise governance, dialogue and approaches that are sustainable and equitable, and based on accepted principles of governance. The very nature of the ocean and her deep abysses, vast and largely unknown to us so far, demand joined up thinking, but also joint action. Also, because so much of the ocean, and I remind you, more than 60% by surface area and 95% by volume, lie beyond national jurisdiction. Neither can any one branch of science or technology provide adequate solutions. It is only through interdisciplinary exchange and transfer of appropriate technology and knowledge that we can hope to comprehend the complex relationships of the ocean and then to govern them. It is indeed a challenge in itself to set new thinking and a new strategy for ocean governance, which transcends the current business as usual mindset. With this in mind, today's event, co-organized with our speakers from the University of Malta and from the UN Conference on Trade and Development, is timely. It serves to underpin and strengthen the IOI's core mission of capacity development in ocean governance, and it complements the IOI training held annually in Canada, China, Malta, South Africa, Thailand, Latin America, and Turkmenistan. The Postgraduate Master of Arts in Ocean Governance, and the launch in 2022 of the IOI Ocean Academy, which adds the dimension of global ocean literacy for all to the ocean knowledge goals of the IOI. In fact, it's a wonderful anniversary program indeed by which to celebrate the IOI's first 50 years. All these opportunities aim to create knowledgeable leaders and practitioners in ocean governance and assist in the uptake of that necessary knowledge and understanding and the tools and processes required to achieve sustainable development and a just and equitable governance of the ocean. Through these efforts over the years, the IOI has empowered some 2,000 alumni from some 140 countries to embrace responsible ocean leadership. Thus, I will take this chance again and your kind attention to strongly encourage the active pursuit and support of those opportunities for positive change in every ocean challenge, to transform entrenched ways of thinking and being so that governance leads to a more sustainable, equitable, and harmonious relationship with our mother ocean and our one world. And finally, I wish success to the seminar and fruitful discussions. I know that the expert speakers shall address the latest developments of this ocean super year and the future of ocean governance through the prism of their expertise. At IOI, we look forward to continuing this conversation together after the event ends, and our work in favor of Planet Ocean continues with even more passion and urgency than before. Thank you. So thank you for this. I'll also put on my second hat, which is that of moderator of this event. The next presentation, because it's a presentation, will be given to us by Dr. David Vivas-Egui, who is a legal officer at the Directorate, at the Division on International Trade and Commodities at the UN Convention on Trade and Development. He's got a background in law as an attorney with more than 25 years of experience in trade, environment, oceans economy, intellectual property, sustainable development, and more than 15 years of experience in strategic planning, programmatic change, implementation, team building, fundraising. You are a man of many talents, right? So he brings his vast expertise to bear on his next presentation, which will discuss the blue biotrade and a new approach for the sustainable use of marine biodiversity. The floor is yours, David.
Thank you, Antonella. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the participants, especially for 50 years of passion and energy in the quest to make the use of oceans and interaction with oceans more sustainable. I will have a PowerPoint, if we can put it on the screen, please. Yes, I will be presenting to you today what we call biotrade. It's a new approach to try to move beyond sustainable use and link it to trade and investment. I will explain. The clicker is not moving. Next, please. Okay, got it. Sorry, I'm just learning. I'm sorry about it. I will give you an overview of the origin of blue biotrade. I will make a definition. I will explain its content. I will give you an overview of one project where we have applied and piloted for the first time in the Caribbean, and we will finalize with a short trip of 5 minutes from Malta to the Caribbean in a video. So we will have fun today. First, I come from the UNCTAD, which is the main United Nations body on trade and development. We deal with all the economic aspects of the UN. We have two programs that have been working for many years, one on oceans economy and fisheries, and another one on biotrade, which seeks to enable sustainable use through trade and investment in terrestrial biodiversity. And we realized at the Ocean Conference of 2017 that there was a need to bring that approach, a merged approach, towards marine biodiversity. In marine biodiversity, you have a huge richness in terms of biodata, species, genes, pools, information, and huge potential in all economic sectors, from fisheries to biotechnology, cosmetics, foods, etc. And that is not being fully used, fully exploited under a sustainable criteria. So together in 2017, UNCTAD, IOI, the CITES, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, and CAF, the Latin American Development Bank, launched what is called Blue Biotrade, again, this approach to biodiversity. Now, what is biotrade? It's a large definition. It includes from harvesting to commercialization, transformation of products and services derived from marine and coastal biodiversity, very large concept, under environmental, social, and economical sustainability criteria. So it's qualified to a set of principles and criteria that will help us here. An important aspect of marine biodiversity is you have the typical use of extracting goods like fish, corals, etc., seaweed, but you have a lot of, again, genetic information, and you have many species that have very low volume in extraction, but very high value in the market, and we may focus on some of them. You always have the information in QR readers if you need it. Now, which are these principles and criteria? The first three come from the Convention on Biological Diversity. Conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use. If you are going to use it, you should ensure that it's there for future generations. But we added number 3, which is one that is missing almost all the time in terms of use of marine biodiversity, which is equitable benefit sharing across the value chain of any product. So from the lowest part of the value chain, usually the poorest, the most vulnerable, and the ones that have less resources, to the upper part of the value chain must benefit from the activity. So they shouldn't always be pressure on the poorest. We also have other criteria, socioeconomic sustainability. The business has to make money. We need to make it traceable. We need to ensure there is safety in sanitary measures. We need to ensure legal compliance with the entire governance framework of the law of the sea, which, by the way, have many gaps, and we're trying to fill some of them right now. We need to respect the rights of actors, especially in terms of knowledge. A lot of the knowledge of management, biodiversity, marine biodiversity is in the coastal populations, in the island populations, not necessarily on the cities and on the consumer side. So we need to respect and listen to that. And finally, we need to have clarity on the right to use and access of natural resources. Many times, the rights of communities, coastal communities, island communities, are prehistorical, pre-state, have been there for centuries. even thousands of years. So that need to be accounted in any policy. Now you have, each of those principles is developed in a set of very specific criteria that you can find in these documents. I don't want to go there, but that will guide governments, private sector, actors in any value chain. And a value chain is basically the production process from extraction to final product to consumer in a very specific angle. Now, I'm going to give example. I have brought a species. We have been working on it in the Caribbean. As Alan has been working with jellyfish, I took a mollusk, you know. It's called Queen Conch, Strombus gaius. It's a CITES listed, appendix to listed species, so regulated trade. But here I want to show you everything you can do with that single species. Most of the benefits come from extracting and selling the meat. It's a delicacy. It's very expensive to eat it. You can use conch treatments, which are the parts that you discard from the meat in cleaning that can be used for fertilizers and bait. You have the shells that are very beautiful, pink, big, this size more or less when they are mature. And there you can do even musical instruments, you can do decorations. You have the pearls. The pearls are unique. They are pink. They are the only ones that are pink. They are super expensive, more than any other pearl in the world, because you get about 1 in each 1,000 conch to get one. So it's very, very rare. You have genes and biochemicals, and this is very important. And we were discussing right now that in the negotiations on a potential treaty on biodiversity in areas with your national jurisdiction, just to give you an idea, the future of the world, especially on the issue of seafood, is going to come mainly from aquaculture. We only know the life cycle of about 200 species. There are hundreds of thousands of species. We don't know the life cycle. We don't know the gene map. We have very little knowledge. So there is a treasure here. Finally, ecotourism, because you can do non-intrusive diving. This is beautiful you can do that in the Red Sea, in the Mediterranean, but also you can see these beautiful species without having to disturb them. And the current trade, legal trade, regulated trade is 74 million, and the illegal trade may be about 10 to 15% of that. And we need to tackle it. I'll continue. Now, we established a project with UNTAC CITES, supported by the European Union and the Organization of East Caribbean States, to try to seize business opportunities from this, because this is mainly artisanal activity. It's a very selective fishing. It's done through diving. So you have to go and take one by one. These are the main countries we have worked: St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Grenada. Now, here we helped them to develop, we did national assessments, we developed a regional plan of action for the entire region, 10 countries, 7 of which are sovereign states, 3 are European territories outside, mainly France and the Netherlands, and the UK. And basically, these are examples of the type of recommendations we give. Here, you have only 3 blocks, which is mainly conservation, sustainable use, and benefit sharing, and access to markets. And basically, some of the recommendations, you need to have a stock assessment of the species so you are able to understand how much you can catch, which are the seasons. You cannot do it nationally because this is a life cycle that goes over the entire Caribbean region. You need to do regionally. You need to organize the producers. They are not organized. They are informal producers, informal economy. We're thinking of restoring the stocks where it has been depleted by building nurseries. We need to improve data collection. We need to have social sustainability. The divers are not protected. There are not protocols. There are only one hyperbolic chamber for the entire divers in the entire region. They don't have insurance. Very, very bad social aspects. We need to address all the export requirements linked to CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. And one of the countries, Grenada, has been subject to 2 trade suspensions. We're trying to get them out so they can do international trade. So this is just an example, no, of what we can do and assess. And here you have the country studies and you can check. Some lessons from the project. Basically, and this is important for all that are here. First, sustainability has a cost. It is not for free. If you want to improve performance, you want to improve traceability, you want to improve the handling, the management of the species, you need to invest. And that has a cost, and somebody has to pay it. And it is unfair that it is paid by the small producers. It has to pay by the end consumer at the end. You know, we can do regional approaches. This is very important in the Mediterranean region, Black Sea region. We cannot work in the oceans alone. We have a phrase, perhaps that helps you, from my own culture. We say, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far away, go together. Don't waste your time. It's important that we have in each of these projects and intervention local ownership. Once you have the communities involved, the government involved with real involvement and also investment, they have to invest to make the project their own. The results are totally different. Another point that it's important to do, you cannot protect what you cannot measure. If you don't know the species, you don't know the reproduction cycle, the volume, the density, you're not going to be able to manage it. Everything that you're going to do is going to be arbitrary. You need to understand your own biodiversity. CITES and CBD implementation, these two conventions should not be disregarded. They need to be considered even more in the current negotiations in ABNG. Finally, we need to match efforts. Everybody has to be part of the solution. And finally, we need to raise awareness and visibility, and that's what we're trying to do here. Now, after all this theoretical explanation, we will have a nice video. If we can do a click, I'm gonna sit so you can watch it. And instead of listening to these boring experts, you will be listening to the people on the ground.
The iconic sound of the Queen Conch signals many things across the Caribbean. For some, particularly in the OECS territories of Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it is the call of opportunity.
You pay your bills with your family.
My dad, that is what he does up to this day, and send all of us to school, and even grandchildren now is going to school from that industry as well.
In October 2020, the OECS, in collaboration with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development and CITES, launched the Blue Biotrade Project. It was financed by the European Union through the RIGHT program.
I want to situate this in the context of the OECS Commission's work plan. Our strategic work plan for this triennium includes a strategic objective of reinventing our economy in the context of the devastation to our economies caused by the pandemic and all climate change and all the other crises that we have been assaulted by.
The Blue Biotrade Project aims to empower fishers and small-scale coastal operators from Grenada, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines to produce and trade Queen Conch responsibly.
We need to understand that in biodiversity, sustainability is important so that those benefiting from the activity or in the activity can continue doing that for generations.
The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, popularly known as CITES, provides guidance on the sustainable management of this invaluable resource.
In terms of conch, once you're exporting the meat, would require a CITES permit from St. Lucia. If you're importing it, you would require a CITES permit from the country of origin.
The three pillars of CITES is to ensure that international trade in CITES-listed species is legal, sustainable, and traceable.
The information gathered through phase 1 of the Blue Biotrade project is being studied and incorporated into an action plan for the advancement of the Queen Conch industry. Key to future success is an ongoing stock assessment to determine what corrective measures need to be implemented.
What we're seeing with the fishers that we're interviewed so far is that they're having to go deeper and deeper and on longer dives to catch the same amount of conch.
Most times about 80 to 100 feet, but there are places where that you have to go to about 115, 120 feet sometimes.
We know that we have been seeing some degradation in the habitats.
The silt from development on land affects the grass, the seagrass, which they live on.
Presently, the Queen Conch is also under threat due to issues such as overfishing and climate change. The queen conch is widely regarded as a delicacy, and many believe there is potential to explore new ways of enjoying the seafood regionally and internationally.
Every part of the conch can be used. The shell can be used for ornaments, to make beads.
It can be used to make carbon neutral cement. It also can be used to make artificial reefs.
I had called far as India. They make buttons and necklaces.
In 2020, conch made up 62.7% of St. Vincent's exported fish and fish products.
We ship, as I mentioned, to Dubai.
Our main markets is in the US. We move anywhere from 5 to 10,000 pounds by monthly.
In Miami presently, a pound of conch is $30 US.
We are actually stepping into not unknown territory, because for years fisher folk have done their thing, but moving it to a new level of sophistication, a new level of value, and a new level of prosperity.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very nice way also to bring our attention to the matter at hand. So whoever comes after you is going to have to live up to this. And this will be Stefano Moncada, who will be speaking to us about the SIDS, Small Island Developing States, Blue Economy, and their development dilemmas. I invite Stefano to take the podium while I introduce him very briefly. So Stefano is Italian and has a background in economics and a PhD from the University of Malta, where he lectures and conducts research in the areas of development economies, climate change, island studies, sustainable development, and related matters. He's also the director of the Islands and Small States Institute, so he brings this expertise to bear in his presentation, and also involved with development and training, climate and environmental change, and as well in he's very active in numerous outreach and knowledge transfer initiatives, such as training courses and consultations. I hope I've done justice to you, Stefano. The floor is yours, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonella, and to the previous speaker. Very interesting. Lots of connections that hopefully will come out during the presentation. I'd like to thank, of course, all the panelists and the excellent work that you've been doing in all these years. You know, this is a testimony, of course, not only of the 50 years tradition and contribution, but I would say also to the current and future activities. So I'm very happy to always contribute and be associated with your work. So again, excellent. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm going to wear one of those hats, which are a bit uncomfortable, and be a bit of a critical voice in some of these concepts, which of course we embrace, and we've seen how cleverly can be implemented, especially from the previous speaker. I will take you through a little bit of a focus on islands. Can the presentation? Yes, I do. I just go on. Okay, the one down. There you go. So basically, I will take you through the issues of islands. That's what we specialize on. It's the Islands and Small State Institute. We've been there for more than 30 years. We specialize on issues related to islands and small states. We offer postgraduate programs and training and consultancy also to many governments or international institutions. We've been cooperating also with many of the Eastern Caribbean countries that I mentioned before. So we're also friends and colleagues with Dr. Didakis, who've been working together on some of the issues, especially on vulnerability and climate change. Yes. Now, we'll try to first define, what we mean by islands and especially SIDS, and then try to address a bit critically the concept of the blue economy to then understand what are the dilemmas that we are facing today, okay, and the challenges, and perhaps even some of the solutions. Now, so what are islands? Of course, islands are defined as those that have a minimum surface of 1 square kilometers. They have a minimum distance from the mainland, they have a resident population, and they are not connected by a bridge. Now, there is a bit of a controversy on this. I won't delve too much into it. Some of the islands that are connected by a bridge are still considered islands, and of course they are, but they might lose some of their vulnerabilities or challenges because, of course, having a steady connection to the mainland reduces some of those initial constraints that you have, right, in terms of communication and connectiveness. But anyway, this is what the definitions say. There are also many islands which are not independent states, okay, subnational jurisdictions. It could be our neighbor Sicily, which is part of Italy, or other islands which are within the country, sometimes even islands that are within lakes, for example, right? Not to take it too much and extend it, but now our research is expanding so much that we're looking into those remote communities that are located in even rural areas, not islands, okay, in mainland countries. But they exhibit the same constraints that islanders face, which are isolated, not well connected. So there is a lot of similarities that can be drawn. Now, just to give you a picture of the context and why is it important, from our point of view of focusing on islands. In Europe, we have more than 5,000 islands. This is a GIS exercise we've done a few years ago with some colleagues here at the University of Malta. They don't cover too much. It's about 7% of the European territories. But of course, as was highlighted by the previous speakers, they hold a lot of importance in terms of biodiversity, history, and cultural heritage, sometimes very specific and unique. Now, if we talk about islands all over the world, right, and we consider those who have a population above 100,000, we're talking about approximately 11% of the world's total population, which is, again, not to be underestimated, right? I'm saying this also not to justify the importance of what we do and our work and focus, but we're talking about sometimes, a considerable proportion of the population, especially in certain areas. Of these, 46 of these islands are island states, so they're in foreign sovereign countries, and they make up 25% of the United Nations members. What does that mean? That 1/4 of the United Nations members are small island states, are island states. Now, this kind of takes into a different perspective, because if you group islands as one unique block, they're not the anomaly anymore. Like, the anomaly is a large state if you look at all the numbers that there are at the United Nations level. So, of course, in terms of population, perhaps GDP or strategic foreign policy importance, large states, make up and have been, of course, historically also more important. However, this is not to underestimate, and the importance of islands, especially in negotiation in terms of climate change, is coming up very strongly also in recent years. Some of these countries, 38, are sovereign, called small island developing states. And this is some of the focus of what I've been talking about today, and part of my research as well. These exhibit specific characteristics. They are located in different parts of the world, Pacific Ocean, the majority, and then we have the Caribbean and Indian Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean as well. Although they are, and they come from different places of the world, they exhibit similar characteristics, especially in terms of some of the challenges, of course, also the opportunities and the resilience that have been able to build, notwithstanding the fact that they are vulnerable and more exposed to some events. The fact that they have a small territory and a small population limit their ability to benefit from economies of scale or large markets. So even in terms of competition, provision of services, they might not be as advantaged as larger states, right? Because sometimes you have to deal with only one operator, and that one operator is either a state-owned or a private, and they might take advantage or not offer as good services as you have in other countries. We also have issues in terms of course, sometimes even in terms of public health or genetics, right? So certain islands have developed through evolution specific diseases or public health issues that are peculiar to their territory. So bottom line, there are some inherent challenges that islands face on top of the normalities of being a state. And that's what we also study and try to understand. Last thing about this specific aspects of islands is that this vulnerability, although it's been accounted and discussed in the United Nations level, it is not fully recognized when it comes to concessional funding. In fact, although there are attempts nowadays to create a multidimensional vulnerability index, with which, of course, also one of our Maltese experts, Professor Lino Bergoglio, is part of. I'm very proud of that. The help, the support that some of these countries will need to have because of this initial vulnerability is not very accounted for. Okay, so there is always still a bit of a gap in supporting some of these challenges. Now, let's go back to our blue economy concept. It's relatively new, okay? It's been perhaps being considered and conceived in academia, in other circles a bit better, but at United Nations level and internationally is the result of the Rio +20 process that kind of advocated the same desired outcomes that you would have on the green economy, right? So the idea, as you know, of using ocean resources, perhaps and hopefully in a sustainable manner, but recognizing that there are a lot of opportunities, while of course recognizing the need to protect ocean resources. The idea is also to decouple, right? To decouple the socioeconomic development from environmental degradation, meaning they can go hand in hand. That's the objective, of course. Okay, so like we've seen, interesting from the previous presentation. Now, what do we talk about here? Some of the things we discussed. So fisheries, for example, to manage the stock and the long-term sustainability. The aquaculture would reduce fish imports and increase employment and provide food security. In terms of shipping and transport, make port infrastructure and interconnectivity also within islands more important and appropriate, also to develop new markets. And also in terms of tourism, ecotourism and ecosystem preservation, restoration, and the importance of using renewable energies, offshore, wind, tidal energy, and all the other aspects that are being researched at the moment. Although, of course, we're still far away from harvesting these resources to make islands 100% fueled by renewables, okay? So there are still a lot of challenges. Now, these are some of the zone rights, as also Antonella was mentioning before. There are great potentials. However, we also have a lot of challenges. Why? Because, of course, those rights come with a cost. So we've been doing some research in the Pacific, and when I was there visiting and doing research in Kiribati, this atoll countries, archipelago, really in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You can see that most of the GDP comes from selling the fishing rights. Okay, so they sell fish rights to international companies to harvest some of their resources in their territorial zones, which of course is not done sustainably. But that's one of the few resources that they have been so far. And that comes, of course, at a cost. The cost for biodiversity conservation, for the fish stock, not just of their country, but of the whole Pacific Ocean area. And perhaps even as a trade-off, not to invest or think of other ways that are more sustainable. And of course, this let me and other colleagues kept thinking of, what is the advantage of embracing the concept of the blue economy if we do not switch around the approach that we've been having so far, traditional market-led approach to the use of resources. If the blue economy is just increasing aquaculture without controlling the consequences on the environment, on the fish itself, also on human health, because of course some of the way aquaculture is being developed with the use of antibiotics and all of that, it might have a repercussion on human health as well when we consume the fish. If we go in that direction, there is no guarantee that this new, interesting, I would say even beautiful concept of the blue economy would give us the desirable effect in terms of sustainability of economic opportunities in the long term for those large ocean nations. So that is the challenge that we have. If we keep on thinking as the ocean as just a resource to be extracted, like for example, deep sea mining, I don't think we're going anywhere. Okay, and again, I'm going to restate my initial disclaimer of wearing the critical hat here. Deep sea mining is perhaps, as I see it, one of the worst diseases we have in front of us. It doesn't only destroy the ecosystem, which is very little, and probably Alan will mention this, for which we really know very little about. Okay, the consequences of destroying something so important, also for some ecosystem mechanisms that give us life and provide livelihoods for many people. And also, deep sea mining is perhaps the epitome, the representation of what market economies should not do, which is use resources without thinking of current and future sustainability, and changing some of the procedures to make this, sustainable in the medium and long term. Now, of course, if on the other hand, the blue economy is understood as working with nature, understanding the patterns of sustainability of the resources, like for example, embracing conservation and restoration of mangroves or seagrass meadows, then that actions can give us back not only, of course, a better and healthier environment, but socioeconomic opportunities that will increase livelihoods and, of course, GDP in this case, if we're so much fixated about this word, for many, many communities and countries. Okay, this is happening already. Okay, like we've seen before with previous experiment, which I hope, of course, has also, and I'm sure there is, some scientific backing for the reproduction of the conch itself. This is happening already. Okay, the way we are capturing carbon through seagrass meadows, right? For example, it is being implemented in the Seychelles. Okay, one of the first countries in the world that has adopted a legislation for the blue carbon markets. Okay, of course, it's a steep learning curve, but we're getting there, and it's being used. Sustainable fisheries, that for nature swap. This is also something that was implemented in the Seychelles. Another very good example, right? Where instead of developing or using the environment in an extractive way, right? Instead of exploiting the resources, we keep it there, right? And we give back. Of course, everything. Sometimes, it's a bit challenging to understand that we have to give a value, sometimes an economic, monetary value to these resources, but perhaps it's the only way to understand, even in international negotiations, that there is space for nature and ecosystems to be protected and give back something to livelihoods. To conclude, as we understood, there are islands, especially seeds, exhibit specific characteristics which need to be understood and perhaps included in the international financing a bit more. The blue economy presents an excellent opportunity to switch our understanding of sustainable development and use of resources. However, unless we foster local development and we really look for preservation, conservation, and restoration, we will run the same problems of substituting a fancy new term for the same old school, of going for market economies that do not account for all the externalities and problems that we are facing. So less extractivism, less market failures, more inclusion of local development. I would like to finish by concluding by reminding everyone that the role of research is extremely important here, because research can, from the ground, inform the decision of policy, guide some of the decisions according to, for example, what is sustainable to be doing, what are the possible mechanisms that can be adopted to maintain an equilibrium that perhaps sometimes is very difficult to understand. We don't extract resources, but people will get poor. There is no contradiction in this. There have been numerous examples where research has helped, supported policy to take the right decisions in order for the environment and the ecosystem to be preserved and socioeconomic development to go on even more, thinking of the long term. Okay, so this contradiction is just in the hands of perhaps few hard-headed categories that are lobbying for their own interests, but not for the interest of, in general, communities and countries. These are some of the references that been based this presentation on. So feel free to get in touch. We'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefano. That was a very thought-provoking presentation, and I like the way that we seem to have a pattern here of messages building one on top of the other and leading into the next presentation. I remind everyone that we will have some time to take questions and the debate at the end of the presentations. And for those of you who are joining us online, there will be the option to place your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, and they will be relayed to the panel once all the presentations have been delivered. So please take advantage, put your questions there, and we'll put them on your behalf to the speakers. So the next speaker is Professor Simone Borg, and she will speak to us about something which I think has been on our mind quite a lot, especially since COP27 in Egypt, which completed recently. She'll be talking to us about ocean governance in a climate change era, and she has described this as a journey through uncharted waters. Simone Borg, Professor Simone Borg, is presently the chair of the Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development and at the Department of Environmental Law and Resource Law within the Faculty of Laws at the University of Malta. She also chairs Malta's Climate Action Board. And in fact, in 2011, she was appointed as Malta's ambassador for climate change, a post she still holds. She brings to bear a very rich background in the law, especially because she is the co-chair of the Forum of European Legal Experts on Climate Change Adaptation and the chair of this platform at the University of Malta and the platform of academics on climate change. She is our partner on the Master of Arts program in Ocean Governance, and we appreciate this very much. She also serves as a representative of the government of Malta to our governing board and has recently been recognized by the President of France with an Order of Merit for her work in environmental law. Thank you very much, Simone. I know you're very busy, but we really appreciate your expertise and your time to be with us today.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Antonella. I really would like to thank IOI for so many years of partnership working together. And I am really grateful to have this audience, particularly our younger generation here present. Not that the older ones are not appreciated, but you all understand our sense of passing on the baton in taking care of the ocean. And we were in your place once. We were inspired by people who, like Elizabeth, like Arvid Pardo, who made a mark whenever they spoke, whenever they talked, in their incessant hard work on providing a life, a breath of life for ocean governance. And this is where we are today. And never underestimate what you can do as you start your career, as you proceed in your early career. Just you have to have a dream in your head that you want to push for and that you want to work for and dedicate your life to. So, how does this function? This, okay, good. So I'm going to speak about the position of the law in all of this, in the sense of we are now going through an era in that is really affecting the ocean directly, an era that is induced by human activity, unfortunately. Climate change brought about by anthropogenic activities, as you know, the emissions of greenhouse gases, and how this is affecting, ironically, the ocean that has been a support, a partner in the planet to bestow us with a climate that we're used to, that we can depend upon, that has led to the flourishing of life as we know it, with its temperate zones, with its frigid zones, with the climate associated with these zones, thanks to this partnership between the atmosphere and the ocean, and even the lithosphere, the land. Okay. So the aim of this presentation, to link it to what the others have said before me, but also to the topic, the legacy interrupted. Why is it an interrupted legacy? Because we have not been able so far to work together. Those of us who've worked in climate change and those of us who've worked in ocean issues, it's only very recent that we're coming together and looking at the two major resources, natural resources of our planet, how to ensure that the governance, that the regulatory framework that we negotiate, that we devise for these two resources can actually support the situation as we know it today, that is protecting the ocean, governing the ocean in an era of climate change. We know that there are various gaps. We know that there is also progress, but the answer to solve current issues lies in a multilateral framework that then can inspire the regional framework and then can inspire the national framework. Without multilateralism, without dialogue, without diplomacy, we would be nowhere. We would simply work in silos and we will continue to make very limited progress, if at all. I think okay, sorry. Okay. The other way?
No, you might have to point to the computer there.
I'm not understanding.
You might have to point the clicker at the laptop.
This one.
That
That one. Okay. Okay, sorry.
Okay. That's the master.
Okay, so this is the other way. So what are these linkages and interruptions? In a very short explanation, we know that climate change is causing various scientific effects, what we call the biological effects, the chemical and the physical changes to the ocean, that they are there. Biological, for example, you have the coral bleaching, which is an example. There are many others. The chemical reaction, because the ocean absorbs a lot of CO2, it's becoming more and more acidic, and it's containing less oxygen. Then you have the physical changes, which we perhaps are more acquainted with, like sea level rise. The ocean is expanding because the ice is melting, and also as a result of heat, the ocean is absorbing that heat, and therefore it is expanding, naturally causing sea level rise. And economists and political analysts tell us, they've been telling us for a very long time, this is what the scientists are telling us, but then the economists and the political analysts are telling us, well, this is going to lead, and it's already leading to, serious environmental and geopolitical repercussions. Just imagine, for instance, if the ocean becomes acidic, it will kill off the conch, which we were looking at. It will kill off the seagrasses that Stefano was mentioning. The chain reaction is horrendous, and therefore this will all lead to the collapse of our economic systems. Obviously, sea level rise then will lead to dispersal of people, the loss of life, loss of amenities, etc. In all of this, our systems have tried to regulate the source of climate change, and also tried over a lot of time, over a huge span of time, to protect the ocean from harm. And in order to walk the talk, I think we need to summarize what we've learned these last few decades in diplomacy. First of all, as I said before, we have worked and continue to work for a very long time in silos. Scientists working on their own, economists working on their own, politicians working on their own, lawmakers working on their own, each with their own agenda, a little bit of communication, but not an organized type of communication. And we are seeing great improvements. Perhaps your generation assumes that policy is inspired by science, should be inspired by science, as Stefano said, that is cardinal, but in reality it hasn't always been so. It has been economic interest that has driven ocean law, for example, for a very long time. And to a certain extent, whenever we put on the brakes on progress, it's usually because we need to meet with economic interests. So we really need to understand that unless we have evidence-based, science-based targets in our commitment to regulate the ocean and climate, we are never going to get anywhere. And this is because climate change, ocean issues are multifaceted. They are wicked problems, the Americans like to call them, in the sense they're complicated, very complicated. And a lot of comparisons have been made that just as the planet works as one entity with all the various contributors, with all the various natural resources, you cannot look at the ocean on its own without considering climate and vice versa, and the impact on land or the impact of the cryosphere, the ice part of the planet. It's the same with humans that need to address these two huge threats that we're facing today, climate change and the death of the ocean, because this is what we're actually witnessing. So what is the state of play under international law at the moment? First of all, we have to look at the multifaceted problem with that kind of approach, in the sense of having this kind of wide spectrum. The law as such has, those of you who have a background in law know that law depends on regulating facts and identifying linkages between harm caused and remedies that are necessary, and linking the harm to the remedies by establishing liability. Who is responsible for what is happening? And the law needs proof, and proof needs to be clear that that action is actually causing that damage. However, these last decades of environmental harm have questioned this kind of legal thinking, because we know that harm is happening, but the complex system of the ocean and also climate change doesn't lead us to identify that a particular harmful action is actually caused by a particular activity carried out by one state or another. In the general sense, yes, we know that emissions of greenhouse gases are causing climate change. But if you have, I don't know, sea level rise, or if you have coastal erosion in a remote island in the Caribbean or the Pacific, we know that this is being caused by climate change, but we do not know if that action is actually caused because, I don't know, a large country, an industrialized country like Canada or the United States actually built a new power plant, and the emissions from that power plant are causing sea level rise directly to a specific island state. We do not have that kind of linkage at law like you would have in normal circumstances. If you harm someone because you hit him with your car, your action actually is the reason why that person got injured. And so you can trace the liability. We do not have this situation in dealing with climate change and ocean protection. So we really need to be more creative. How to, first of all, prevent the harm, then to remedy the harm when it happens, and as much as possible, annul the harm altogether. So this is why the law has become more and more preventive and precautionary. The difference between the two is that the first one is when we prevent an action because we're sure that it causes harm. Okay, like if you discharge residues of oil in the ocean, obviously that causes harm, it causes pollution, kills off wildlife, etc. But there are also certain actions that perhaps we are not completely sure that they are causing harm, but science tends to show us there is a high risk. And this is where the precautionary principle applies. What Stefano was mentioning, for example, with deep sea mining, and I'm sure perhaps that Alan will be mentioning it as well, because right now it's a very topical issue and we've been discussing it this very week. Deep sea mining, the mining for minerals in the deep ocean has been possible ever since UNCLOS came into force. In the past, nobody knew that mining these minerals can cause harm to the ocean, but nowadays, with the scientific information we know. So because we didn't know in the past and it exists in the law, it makes no sense to carry it out today when science shows us that there is a high risk, because these minerals are in the same areas where many vegetation, deep sea vegetation, which is very unique, is found. So this is the dilemma that we're constantly working with. As science uncovers new issues, then the law needs to keep up with it and needs to be inspired by it and needs to be applied in accordance with what science tells us. So basically, we have two processes. I will go through this very fast. You have international climate law. You are aware that it's very acrimonious, that it has been going on for a very long time. We have a very important scientific body, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which provides all the information, the scientific information on climate. And it has been very inspirational in the procedures leading to climate negotiations. Not that the politicians and the negotiators listen to the science all the time, but at least it's there. With respect to the oceans, it's been a bit different because the ocean has been regulated for a very long time, a number of centuries. And we tend to separate the ocean into two areas falling under national jurisdiction, areas falling outside national jurisdiction. And so even there, you have a lot of fragmentation and a lot of silo working. Now, the two aspects are, because they have been regulated separately, there are attempts to get together. In fact, in UNCLOS negotiations that still continue, and in ocean related fora. Climate change is being mentioned all the time, the relationship between climate and ocean. In climate negotiation, we are including also the ocean as an issue of concern. But for a very long time, the two factions were very, very careful on not, treading on each other's toes. This is my remit, this is my remit. And this is the famous syndrome, don't step on my turf. As you will continue to work and to be part of the working world, you will realize how this is a constant problem, even in our daily lives when we work. You get a lot of resistance from some people you work with because they think that you are encroaching on their area, when very often what you really are doing is trying to join the dots, to synergize. But human nature is usually very much on the defensive about this. And this is something that we have to break through. This is a kind of attitude that is very harmful to protect the ocean and to protect climate. We really need to join the dots. We really need to work together. And this is what we are now trying to do. Sorry about that. I think we have, yes, we have various, you can see all the multilateral and regional instruments that we can work with. So there is a huge array of sources of law. And we also have various conferences and policies documents like Agenda 21, the Rio +20, the SDGs. And not to mention as not influential, they're in fact very useful, is domestic legislation, national legislation, where we have had serious attempts at synergizing because, for example, we have marine spatial planning. So it's very easy, obviously, at the national level to work even closer together. It's easier, not that easy, but it's easier. Yes, so to conclude, what kind of suggestions can we make to help the current situation? First of all, we need to work to build awareness, what we tend to call literacy. We need to inform people from the grassroots up to the politicians, the decision makers, how things work, what science is telling us. We need to build that kind of knowledge base. And the more people understand, the more they are ready to take measures to come out of their comfort zone and to be able to make the necessary changes. We've seen that in the video that David showed us, how people themselves, the fishermen themselves, wanted to protect the conch. Okay, so when the fisherman wants to protect the conch, the politician up there is not going to argue, my fishermen don't want to stop fishing for the conch because it will mean that they'll earn less money. It is the grassroots that will influence the politicians, not vice versa. So it's very important. The awareness building is particularly important, but it's important at all levels. Obviously, we need to collect the scientific data, but then there's a very important exercise. Scientific reports are what they are. The scientists among you work with data, graphs, etc. People don't understand that. Normally politicians, especially if they're lawyers, don't understand graphs. They have to be told what it means, and we have to, break it down, streamline it to translate it into legal obligations and policy measures. If you're telling me that seagrasses are being influenced by I don't know what is the policy measure required to protect them then? Okay, we need to make that kind of translation of scientific terms into how this can be addressed from the policy and the legal level. We need to have the backing of economists. We need to have economic reports telling us how much it will cost if we don't do anything. And again, the video from that David showed us gave that kind of value. That's why we talk about the blue economy. We cannot say, let's change things because we are, we want to be environmentally 100% friendly. True, that is desirable, but you need to make socio-economic sense. You cannot land people whose job depends upon something without a job. So we need to be aware of what the implications are socially and economically. and then make the necessary changes, train people, if necessary, train them to change their jobs, if their jobs are no longer viable, sustainable, etc. But at the same time, you need to know how you can support even financially the necessary changes. So we identify the harm first, then we say what the effects are and what we need to do about it, okay? So if the harm is warming, then we need to address those effects. The legal framework affecting climate and the ocean needs to address all those effects in some way. We have to have policy and legal measures that address that. If you look at ocean acidification, the same. You need to identify the harm and try to prevent it altogether. Okay. The same with trying to ensure that you are comprehensive in addressing all sources. You cannot focus on just one source, but for example, emissions on land, emissions at sea, all types of emissions, how the pollution issues, how plastic pollution interacts perhaps with all the other ailments that the ocean is facing through climate change, etc. And obviously, any environmental problem has to be considered within a larger context. If one controls marine pollution, there might not be emissions of greenhouse gases, but it will still help the ocean in addressing climate change because we are tackling the health of the ocean. If the ocean is healthy, then it can react and it can protect itself better when it is facing other dilemmas and other threats. So the kind of, again, synergy between the different aspects of ocean health are very important to consider. Beating parallelism is a very important topic we've talked about, and it needs to be addressed everywhere, at the scientific level, at the institutional level with governance, okay? And securing a holistic approach at all the sectors, within all the sectors, but also within all the levels. The more important involvement which we found recently is the involvement of non-state actors, and IOI is a perfect example. When I say recently, I mean 50 years. Because we've seen how an institution like IOI has been so instrumental in dedicating itself to ocean literacy, in establishing partnerships with UNCTAD, for example, and other institutions that are within the UN and even beyond the UN. It is also important to have the participation of non-state actors because they are more constant. Governments come and go. If you have an institution like IOI that has built a reputation over the years and has a certain stability and reputation, then obviously as governments change, they will see the kind of stability in information provided by IOI, in guidance for policy making provided by IOI, and that will help and alleviate a bit the burdens that governments have to face, even in passing on, making the necessary changes and passing on the messages. It also helps to mobilize funding for research, because obviously it has a lot of networks and that will influence what happens in universities, etc. This does not mean, and I always stress this because sometimes NGOs are very critical, this does not mean that governments abdicate from their responsibilities. Governments remain the drivers, but obviously they need partners. And non-state actors like IOI, and that's why we're so happy to celebrate this anniversary today, are crucial. With that, I conclude my presentation, and thank you very much for your attention.
thank you very much, Simone, for your presentation, and also, if I may, for very deftly putting your finger or pointing at a number of shortfalls and gaps and areas where we could do more and better as, you know, the inhabitants of this planet, in each of us in our different ways at our different levels. So, and one thing I particularly liked is your driving home of the fact that we are really one biome, right? Climate and ocean are interlinked and must be understood in their integrity in order to take those necessary actions to protect it in due course. So we now come to an intervention, a presentation by Professor Alan Daydoun, and he will be talking on a topic that has been alluded to by several speakers before him, because we're very much afraid that seabed mining is one of these alarming topics of the moment. And the reason it's alarming is partially because there's so much we don't know about it, and the impact of it can be so great if it goes ahead. So, Alan, I invite you to take the floor to talk about seabed mining and its threat to humanity. In the meantime, I'll introduce you briefly. Alan, you're a marine biologist by training and Malta's ocean ambassador, and you also have a lot of work that you carry out, partly as a member of the EU Commission's Ocean Mission Board. You're the director of the Malta Training Center of the IOI, and as well as a full professor in the Department of Geosciences and University of Malta. You do a lot of work locally within the environment, in European regions, and also now you are very active. I know that you are very active even in questions of ocean literacy, partly because of the various projects you had, but also because you're a journalist locally. And I know from our personal friendship through the IOI and before that you are very active in ocean matters. So the floor is yours. We're looking forward to your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonella, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear students. It's obviously always a pleasure to be here. You know, I don't need any special occasion to obviously be happy about participating with IOI, but all the more, you know, that we are commemorating this important anniversary. So yes, I think some of you or most of you have actually or have watched a series on Netflix, which is Money Heist, and I am referring to it because I recently penned an article in the newspaper where I used the term heist, which in my opinion is a very powerful term. And I titled this article, I think if I recall correctly, the world's largest environmental heist, because this is what I call seabed mining, as you'll probably appreciate from the presentation that I will start soon, in terms of volumes of material, in terms of the value of the materials that are up for grabs. So there's really a lot at stake here. And it surprises me how there's a very nice expression in English, we miss the wood for the trees. We tend to focus on nitty-gritty issues here on land when the real deprivation, the real depletion, the real pillaging will happen at the bottom of the sea in a dark, faraway place, however, on this same planet. Okay, so without much, yes, no, I went back. Okay, yes. So seabed mining, in a way, you know, I hate to point fingers. So we are part of this demand behind seabed mining. When I say we, okay, partly the EU, obviously, because of the Green Deal, partly because of our green transition to electric cars, you know, to digitization. Everything has to be accessible from a laptop, from a mobile phone, okay? So we are fueling the demand. And in fact, there's been a lot of economic studies suggesting that Europe's Green Deal, but the world, not just the EU, needs massive quantities of these precious metals in order to make the Green Deal possible. In fact, this graph aptly shows this. So for 3 precious metals, but there's plenty more that we need for the Green Deal: lithium, nickel, and cobalt, which are probably some of the precious metals for which the shortages on land will be most acute, and which are needed in the greatest quantities for the Green Deal. So on the left-hand side, okay, for labeled 2020 are the current tonnage that we need for each. Lithium, the world in 2020 needed 23 kilotons. In 2050, that amount will increase by 3,500% to 861 kilotons. Okay, you see the massive jump that we will experience in the needs for lithium. Okay, nickel, 103% increase in demand from 2020 till 2050. So we'll more than double our needs. Cobalt, 331% jump. Okay, so in order to reach this climate neutrality pledge that Europe has made through the Green Deal, and this I think is an oxymoron, is the mother of all ironies, we have to devastate a part of the planet that we don't actually still understand, we haven't yet investigated, just to be green. I think this is if that is not ironic, I don't know what it is. It's basically, it's tragic, and it's, it's actually a tragical comedy, because it's like, putting all our problems under the carpet, because it's the deep seabed. Nobody, it's as long as we can drive our electric car, and we're not emitting, then it's okay. Who cares about the, undiscovered sponge at 2,000 meters in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Who cares about that? So, we have a tendency, we humans, to tend to overlook problems away from sight, away from heart, as long as we don't see the problem. Who cares about the ozone layer up there? Who cares about anything, as long as it's not affecting my patch, okay? So, and these economic studies, the previous slide referred to 2050. And again, some of you might twitch your noses and say 2050, that's almost 30 years ago. But we will start experiencing supply problems by 2030. Okay, supply problems by 2030. What is the solution? Because you might say, Allora, what do? We turn our backs on the green transition, on the Green Deal, on climate neutrality? No. One of the possible solutions, okay, is a greater emphasis on recycling of metals and the circular economy. We need to reuse and reuse and reuse metals. And that's why there is a growing market for used mobile phones, for used laptops, and so on. Okay, and those graphs on the right-hand side are showing you the impact of recycling, that we can at least reach 3/4 of our demands for these precious metals by 2050 if we resort to recycling. So we might still need some mining, either on extra mining, either on land or in the seabed, but at least it's not that bad. Okay, just to mention cobalt. Okay, 3/4 of the world's mines are located in Congo, where there is a lot of geopolitical issues. So there isn't, a secure supply. Okay, and you can destabilize supply, because you can have a country, and this is already happening, buying up all the mines in Africa. China, for instance, is buying a lot of mines of precious metals. So this is the new oil. This is the new, gold. This is these precious metals. So lithium is probably one of the, I would say, humblest elements. It's the third lightest. It's the third located in your periodic table. So it's extremely brittle. We had to pick up a piece of lithium. You can easily flake it, break it, but there's an immense demand for it. On land, Bolivia is one of the big exporters of lithium, because they have these hypersaline lakes, okay, super salty lakes, and they extract lithium from there. The figure on the right-hand side is very telling. it shows you different precious metals, the names of which are sometimes difficult to pronounce because we don't encounter them every day, okay? So things like niobium. Who has ever heard of niobium, okay? Thorium, but we're probably making use of these even today now in this room, in this hall, okay? So the bigger the blue circle, okay, the bigger the amount found in seabed deposits. So there are two circles, okay? There's the orange one on the outside, which shows the quantity found on land, in mines on land, and the blue one is the quantity found in seabed deposits. For most, luckily, there's more volume in mines on land so far than in nodules. But nickel, for example, okay, nickel, as you can see, is the opposite. There's more nickel in seabed deposits than there is on land. Unfortunately, cobalt is the same. The blue circle dwarfs the golden one. Copper, okay, there's a lot of copper on land, but still the seabed deposits are quite attractive in terms of quantities, and for the others. So this is a seductive and appealing, treasure, okay? So the seabed, the deep seabed, it is an undisturbed place so far, okay? And we are speaking of, as a biologist, the deep sea is anything beyond 200 meters, but most of it is at thousands of meters, okay? So it's a world of extremes, temperature close to zero, no light. There's no light beyond 1,000 meters. Sometimes even at 600, 700, we'll go from the twilight zone into the dark. So if you think about it, most of the seabed in the world is in complete darkness, okay? Pressure can extend 1,000 bars, exceed 1,000 bars. This is equivalent to having a couple of elephants standing on your big toe. So there's a lot of pressure down there, okay? But still you have plenty of life, okay? Every dive they do in deep waters, in the trenches, okay, in the deep trenches, in the Hadal zone, in the abyss, yields new species, okay? Just to mention, and there's another important commemoration this year, it's 150 years since the HMS Challenger global survey, which heralded the era of modern oceanography. So modern oceanography, in the same way, that the mid-19th century was the age of discovery. Okay, you had Charles Darwin on the biology side with the Beagle, but then on the oceanography side, you had the HMS Challenger. Started 1872, lasted for 4 years till 1876. The Challenger went into the deep. They went close to the Marianas Trench. There's the Challenger deep. In fact, they found almost 5,000 species in that single survey, new to science. Okay, so the age of discovery is still with us because we're yielding species that we don't know to which group they actually belong. If they're a sponge, if they're a mollusk, we don't even know that. Okay, and we try, and I don't completely agree with this approach, we try to justify their existence by finding a molecule which is useful for humans. We say, we should preserve species 1 because it has an anti-tumoral drug, which is promising for humans. Since when had we to justify the right of a species to existence just because they are useful to humans? Since when? So whenever we should walk in the street and we find any species that we don't understand, we simply kill and whatever. So we've reached that stage where to ward off seabed mining, we have to find specific uses for these deep sea species. Okay, so these are species which have never encountered man. It's completely calm down there, no currents. And this is an important point because as soon as you go and even dip your finger in the seabed, the sediment is so fine and there are no currents that the plume will take years. The plume of fine particulates will remain suspended, will take years to actually fall back in its place. That's the major issue. It's not the only concern, okay? There is, you might have heard, this Nippon Foundation JEPCO 2030 seabed mapping initiative to try to map the entire seabed of the world. We're still at 23%, okay? Compare that with 99% of the surface of the moon, 95% with the surface of Mars. So we're going in uncharted grounds. Okay, so this is we're progressing quite well, you know. So this is the level of progress in mapping the global seabed. Last year it was 20.6, now it's 23.4, but still has to be taken with a pinch of salt. This is not at high resolution, okay? And there's a lot of interpolation, okay? So we cannot identify the species through this exercise. We don't know exactly what species, you know, which protected species are found where. You don't go to the species level. You just can say, for example, if the seabed is sandy, if it's rocky, it's low resolution. You cannot jump from 20.6 to 23.4 of the global ocean in 1 year at high resolution. Okay, so this is not a panacea. Okay, which are these mineral resources that companies now and countries are targeting? Manganese nodules. There's 3 types: cobalt crust and massive sulfides. Especially interesting are the first one, is the first category, the manganese nodules. So 3,000 to 6,000 meters, especially rich in nickel, cobalt, and copper, but they would have a mixture of other precious metals as well. And this is where they're found. The Pacific Ocean is especially rich in them, okay? But there's also big concentrations as well. The manganese nodules, sometimes they're called, through the generic term, polymetallic nodules. They're also found in the Atlantic as well, in parts of the Atlantic, okay? So there's a lot of these mineral deposits. So this is what they look like, the manganese nodules on the left. This is from the CCZ, the Clarion Clipperton Zone, which is probably the largest accumulation of these nodules, found somewhere north of Hawaii. Okay, so in the North Pacific, but far away from everywhere. And this is, you know, these are both come from GeoMar, Kiel, University of Kiel as well, through the ROV, which can go down to, ROV is a remotely operated vehicle, okay? With your joystick, you can manipulate and so on, can go down to 6,000 meters. You can see a nodule, okay, with a creature, because you don't know exactly what it is, the creature growing on top of it, okay? So we are exploiting the seabed already in a different way from seabed mining. So we are already picking organisms from the seabed, but it's not seabed mining. Let's make a difference here. For instance, these are glass sponges from the middle of the Atlantic. These were they were being targeted through a European funded project called Sponges, which has just finished. And these sponges, okay, they found a new treatment for cholesterol from them. But what they did was, and this is incredible, they lowered on the right-hand side this chamber at 600 meters. Imagine lowering it at 600 meters. And they were injecting that chamber containing the sponges with sediment plumes to see how they would react to a future seabed mining start. You know, once there is seabed mining in their proximity, how would they react to seabed mining? But this is work which has just started. So that's why we need the precautionary approach. This is work which has just started. We really don't know how these species will respond. There isn't the data, okay? There are just case studies. There are, you know, one-offs. It's snapshots, you know? So why the rush? Why the rush? So let's go to timeline. So 1972, CCZ, that Clarion Clipperton Zone in north of Hawaii, was discovered incidentally by a young ecologist, a German ecologist, who was accompanied on the trip by a lot of mineralogists and geologists who are interested obviously in the rocks, okay? And he conducted in the late 80s the first impact studies, which showed at that time that the plume would be huge, the sediment plume, and the impact would be massive. So the ISA, International Seabed Authority, and all those pushing in favor and so on, they already knew from the late 80s, there were already some studies from the late 80s, what, you know, we were going to face. So from the 90s till to date, the ISA has been drafting this famous mining code, okay, which should be the regulatory guidebook, you know, before actually licenses are given for seabed mining. In the same period, a lot of exploration licenses have been granted, exploration licenses, Okay, for instance, in 2018, Poland, 10,000 square kilometers in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. In 2022 alone, 31 such exploration licenses were granted by the ISA. In July 2020, you had Nauru, which is the third smallest country in the world, triggering the 2-year rule. There's this rule which states that, you know, you are sort of arm twisting the ISA, you know, to publish its mining code within the next 2 years, or else we'll start mining, you know, regardless. So, so we might actually be looking at the first seabed mining operations in July of next year. Okay, in July of next year. In last 2 months ago, the ISA granted permission to the metals company, TMC, which is a Canadian company, to test their deep seabed mining equipment in the Pacific, to test their equipment now in the field. So it's no longer sci-fi, okay? This is now on the horizon, okay? This sparked international outrage in October 2022. So here I have some cuttings. If you have a how shall I say, a membership, whatever, I suggest you read that article from the New York Times. It's an excellent article, Secret Data, Tiny Islands and the Quest for Treasure on the Ocean Floor. It shows actually the power that commercial lobbies can have, unfortunately, on decision making. Nauru actually sometimes gave its place at decision-making boards to this company. So Nauru, some of these meetings was being represented by this company, which is incredible. How can a country be represented, you know, by a commercial entity? It's not me who's saying this. Read all about it over there. This is really a scandal, okay? So Maori, they have this company, incorporated and registered in Nauru, a wholly owned subsidiary of Canada-based mining startup, the Metals Company, which before used to be called Deep Green, but then they changed their name, okay? Because it was embroiled in quite a few things, Deep Green, so they changed the name to the Metals Company, okay? November 2022, a coalition was formed. You had President Macron during his inaugural speech at COP27 speaking in favor of a ban or temporary moratorium, at least on deep sea mining. Initially there were these countries which joined this coalition: France, New Zealand, Germany, Panama, Palau, Fiji, Samoa, Micronesia, Chile, Costa Rica, Spain, Ecuador, and now even Malta. Okay, this week Malta was approached by the French embassy, and Malta expressed itself in favor of this. Okay, so at least, you know, and you can see over the years, you know, the exploration licenses which were granted mainly for the nodules. You see the blue part, it's the nodules. So that is where most interest is of those three types. Okay, there's the crusts and the sulfides, but it's the nodules where there is most interest. Okay, this is the CCZ and the way it's been partitioned in terms of exploration. You might think, why are some countries represented there? South Korea, Samsung. South Korea has a big allocation. Samsung is South Korean. They need those precious metals. We need those precious metals as we're using Samsung. So, you know, that's why I said I started not with the finger pointing. We're part of the demand, obviously. Okay. So the ISA, you know, this, and I'm almost done. Okay. This international organization obviously mandated under UNCLOS, which should regulate seabed mining so that we don't have yet another tragedy of the commons. We don't have another pillaging of resources that we've observed on land so many times for various done. So the mission statement: to adopt rules, regulations, and procedures for the conduct of activities in the area. Okay, in the area, obviously, it's the high seas. Okay, and there is this mining code. It has 168 members, so you know most of the world is represented in the ISA. These are some of the obviously reports that have been produced and are obviously presented to members at the meetings. But what is needed obviously is an ISA which is ready before we actually, you know, before the penny drops, as they say, for seabed mining, okay, and to develop a regulatory framework for mineral exploitation, okay. Equipment development is there. The equipment is there, okay, the equipment is there. So this is, I'm not going to go through this because we're short on time, but this is part of the letter that was sent by, that the declaration by France made sent actually to the ISA on the 10th of November this year. Okay, so this is part of it. And if you read, I'm going to read the last paragraph only. As of now, we are therefore joining all the states that are truly concerned by the protection of this common heritage, that is the marine environment and biodiversity, and who have recently expressed various ways their concerns over deep seabed mining. In this forum, the ISA, we are of course open to constructive dialogue with all your governments and the ISA so that we can make inclusive progress on the knowledge of the seabed for the good of humankind. Okay, so and this bold move by France comes somewhat as a surprise, a positive surprise, given that France has the capabilities, it has the research infrastructure to mine the seabed. So its major institutes, IFREMER and CNRS, they have some of the best ROVs in the world, and they have done numerous missions in the deep ocean. So this comes, you know, and they have companies which use these precious metals, big companies, including automotive ones and so on. So it comes really as a positive surprise. Okay. In Europe at the moment, the two countries which are actually pushing a lot for seabed mining are the UK and Norway. Okay. So what are the impacts? Obvious impacts: you destroy the biodiversity associated with nodules. You smother anything around through the plumes. There's another thing: you pump up the stuff, but then what do you do with the processed sludge? Because then once you've got all the usefuls from the material, you have to pump back the sludge. And it's not pumped back on the seabed because it's too expensive. They're thinking of releasing it at a depth of 1,000 meters, which is still far away from the origin, okay? There's a lot of contaminants which have piled up in the seabed over thousands, if not millions of years. You're kicking them up, those contaminants, those pollutants, heavy metals and so on, okay? So this is obviously what happens, okay? The plume, as I said, is the biggest concern, but it's not the only one, okay? There's the contamination, as I said, and other stuff, okay? So this is simply a plume from an underwater eruption in the Canary Islands, and it was visible from space. This is just, you know, a natural event, a natural disaster. So the modeling is also based on other events which could be used to understand how the plume could actually spread, okay? So you have from different mine areas, you can have a cumulative impact. Even that, we speak a lot about environmental impact assessments, but you have to look as well at the cumulative impact, okay? Different mining areas and the plume that they generate together, okay? And this is my last slide. I love this slide about the proportional principle. The two frogs, especially the two frogs, on the left-hand side is a guy who believes in the burden of proof. He would say, you know, we will get out of this tub when you prove we will be boiled alive. But the other guy, who's slightly wiser, we should get out until you can prove we won't be boiled alive. And that is the precautionary approach, okay? So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan, for your very passionate presentation. And I think it's very clear to us now in this room and the people following us that this is something which is of great concern, merits further attention and debate. I will now very quickly invite class representative Chiara Mondaini to give us a message from the class of 2022, who are participating in the IOI's training program on regional ocean governance in the Mediterranean, Black, Baltic, and Caspian seas, which is running right now in Malta. We affectionately call it the Malta course. So Chiara, a few words from you, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We are now going to talk about the contradictory priorities of ocean governance. So the IOI is a unique training institution that is able to provide many educational possibilities in ocean governance, adapted to the local needs and at all the levels of society, from children to mid-career professionals who can attend academic courses and training programs regarding regional and global oceans. This year marks the 50 years anniversary of the establishment of the IOI. And with the new challenges and emerging issues, it has the possibilities of reaching the general public and lay persons, particularly the young generation to whom the future belongs and who can indeed make a difference. On behalf of the participants of the class of 2022 of the training program on regional ocean governance for the Mediterranean, Black, Baltic and Caspian seas here in Malta, we appreciate the United Nations efforts to protect the environment, which undoubtedly includes the oceans, but we wish to clarify a few points. Environment-related issues are never addressed in a timely manner, in stark contrast to issues relating to human economic development and technologies. This seminar aims to address global concerns regarding the current impasse in the sustainable management of the oceans and how the future of ocean governance depends on the effectiveness of holistic cooperative management and, most importantly, urgent and sustained action to address complex marine issues. When we refer to making a difference in supporting sustainability in an equal world, we have to keep in mind future generations. Today, we have talked about uninterrupted legacy. However, I strongly believe it will never be really interrupted. There are lots of people that live by the words of those who came before us, such as Elizabeth Mann Borghese, who in 1976 said, "We must save our ocean if we are to save ourselves." When we refer to future prospects, we have to ask ourselves what we really want for our future. For example, promoting the concept of climate justice, in which superpower countries responsible for climate change must cease producing massive amounts of greenhouse gases because the compensation for the affected countries will not be enough. Some areas are vulnerable to disappearing and getting inundated by the seawater, and others are heavily affected by pollution. So the well-being of the ocean impacts on the humankind. We are bombarded every day with news regarding the environment, with people that protest in museums with soups, with footage of glaciers melting, or the plastic islands formed because we haven't consumed sustainably during the years. I invite you please here to have a moment of reflection of what sustainability really means. It's an overused term that also led to greenwashing. Sustainability is described as fulfilling the needs of current generation without compromising the needs of future generations, while ensuring a balance between economic growth, environmental care, and social well-being. However, the new generation is slowly discovering the interrupted legacy of reusing objects and consuming more consciously. In the same context, a new term has been used in the last few months, which is eco-anxiety. Do we really want to live constantly preoccupied with our future on the earth, or shall we start to think about its integrity? We are part of this earth as many other species, whether they are mammals, insects, and so on. The legacy we need to continue is caring for our planet and nature and its integrity. The scale of the many challenges is not resolvable by nations acting alone. Neither can any branch of science and technology provide an adequate solution without the humankind's capacity to cooperate, thanks to a transparent collaboration between the countries, and with the development of a virtual portal for the youth to share their ideas and visions. Every little effort can count, but we must act together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chiara. I think we have a few words to summarize this from the chair of the panel, and then we can proceed to the question and answer session. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not going to summarize anything, but I've just made a commitment to the class, and I stand by that commitment that this message will reach the Secretary General of the UN, Mr. Guterres.
Thank you very much. I think we have a few minutes, a couple of minutes for questions, and I would like to start by taking some questions from the floor, if there are any, because I know also that there is another question from our Zoom panelists. So if you would kindly stand up and ask any questions. We also have a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They were very good, informative talks, but especially the last one, Ellen, like we're thinking about we are going green, but we realize when we are going green, we are destroying even more. So when I'm thinking always, like what's the root cause of all these things? There are many agreements, countries are getting together, even for climate issue, they cannot agree. Still they are thinking, oh, give me more, take less. But maybe the main reason of all these things is the population increase. Somehow, maybe there is a new agreement needed to cap population increase or to slow down the increase of this population. Do you think that could be possible?
Thank you, Alice. I'm not sure I'm the right person to actually respond to this, and I don't want to put any of my colleagues on the spot because I think it's important to take a question. But yes, obviously demand and consumerism and everything. Obviously, that is the root cause. But if we can actually realistically aspire to mandate population control, I think it's beyond us, because there would be a lot of objections, obviously, from different quarters. There's so many arguments in it, not just scientific and from an environmental management point of view. There are some regions which actually need more people, where the birth rate has declined so much. The question is the distribution of people on the planet. It's not actually, and obviously I refer to Gandhi's famous words, that the world's resources can feed all the world's people, but they cannot feed the greed of all the world's people. So it depends on the disparity of resources as well, because if you look at the carbon footprint of people, for example, in certain parts of the world, and you compare it with that of others, there's a huge disparity of how much, even in terms of emissions, so I think it's the disparity more than the population, but I wouldn't dare suggest that we can ever mandate this. It should be obviously voluntary, and there are ways through which this can obviously come about without a top-down approach, without anybody saying you should limit a one-child policy or whatever. I think through greater education, through greater education, awareness, job opportunities, which are not linked only to men will work, where you need a large population, those will achieve something which, shouldn't be left simply to policymakers to say, listen, each country should stick to this threshold. There's the human element here, which is much trickier than we might think. And so, yes, of course.
If I may add to what Alan has said, first of all, that would never be accepted in a democracy, in many cultures. It's too much of an invasion of governments over private decision making. But what Alan has said is true. It's not the population really, because 80% of consumption happens in the West, where the population is actually not so vast, so large. So it's the consumption, the consumerism, the greed, the waste that is causing this demand, this unsustainable demand. So this is it, really. It's true that, for example, and this goes back to the argument sometimes made at the climate negotiations, we say they are the emerging economies now that are emitting much more than the older large economies. That is true. But the emerging economies are also feeding the consumerism in the West. So, this is the whole concept of having a lot of overheads to put down the prices, etc. And I think we're starting to see this in this kind of, awareness building in the circular economy. But I really do wish that we start, just like you have on a packet of cigarettes. This is a serious threat to your health. I think each time we buy a product, there should be all the warnings, whether this was manufactured by child labor, where the minerals from it are coming from, in order to make consumers aware that they might be the most, convinced people of wanting to be green, and yet we are not well aware, very often, about the things we consume, the impact they have on the environment, but also on certain other tragic situations on our planet, like child labor, for example, or inhuman and degrading conditions for workers in developing countries. So I think that is also an answer. I also wanted to take the floor because I have to be excused. I have a meeting with the rector, which I cannot miss. And so I wish to thank you again. And if you have any questions directed to me, please give them my email, whatever. The chat line is open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone, for joining us. I know that you've got a very tight timetable, so thank you very, very much for this, and any questions, we'll pass them on to you. I know also that David wanted to add a few comments of his own to the question brought up by Dr. Kides. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Sometimes the simplest questions are the most difficult to answer. I will say two things. I wouldn't discuss the issue of population growth, but I will discuss on what we can do today and future generations. And I will have the two angles: consumer, as Ambassador Borg mentioned, but also producer. On consumer, we need to reduce our consumption patterns in many areas. We need to reduce most of the materials we have. We need to substitute more biodegradable, compostable, and recyclable products and stop using other sorts. And we need to increase recycling and management waste capacities all over. So this is a formula, at least, that what we do have an impact today. And on the producer side, when she was mentioning environmental law, I think I would complement what she said on the not to harm principle, that there is another principle in the Rio Convention that we have explored little in environmental law, and it goes into competition and consumer law, which is the polluter pay principle. And we need to think how we establish clear liabilities between production and externalities. Who's responsible? How we make those producers accountable? And second, there are tools already there that can be used, but I'm going to just mention one, the extended producer responsibility. That means that the producer should not be only covering the risk of the production, but the effects of the production, and also the cost of waste disposal, recycling, etc. So it is a complete cost formula. That will increase in cost, and that's what we have to understand. We will all have to consume less, and we will all have to pay more for the same. Sadly, the planet has limits, and I'm just going to give one example. Today we have the one of mining, but did you know that today 1/3 of all fish stocks are depleted, and all the fisheries in the world only supply 50% of the fish that is on your table? So we reach a limit. There is no more fish in the entire ocean. And there are many things that are not there anymore. And this is today. I'm not talking about in 20 years. So reaching the limit is happening in this generation.
Tonella, can I very quickly? Sorry. Thank you. Thanks for the question. I believe that something in terms of population control can be done. My opinion, should be done. It's of course, my personal opinion. Of course, not by invading the individual rights and the willingness of people. However, population growth is an issue. The resources are limited, and there is a trajectory that is going to, we don't know this from now. From the 17th century, we've been discussing this, with the Malthus and onwards. But we don't have just enough. However, of course, the way in which we do it is very sensitive, can touch very, personal and spiritual and religious rights. However, I believe there is also the power of incentives. I believe a lot in this, and I'm going to link to also some of the issues that have been discussed now by advocating for disincentives. So many policy options have been adopted throughout the years, whereby by simply either taxing or regulating, of course, not with the one-child policy, but we know with different measures, behaviors have changed, right? Now, just to link also with the other aspects that have been discussed, every year we give $5 trillion US, $5 trillion US, just try to figure out this number, around 7% of the global GDP for incentives, subsidies for fossil fuels. Now, what if we redirect or we start to redirect some of these for things that do not harm or help to change the behavior towards sustainable use of resources? Now, we have the tools, we can use the market at this time as our ally by redirecting some of the resources that are already there. Now, of course, this will create conflicts because there are lobbies and there are people who are benefiting from exploiting the seabed, from using fossil fuels. But of course, it always depends on what type of present and future we would like to have. No, I guess we would like to have one that is livable and actually doable rather than a dark cloud. So I think this can be done. And I'm going to finish by saying that it is very important to look at the grassroots, like Simone Borch was saying before. Things can be changed if the population creates some pressure. So in the importance of NGOs, civil societies, and even research to link together and raise the awareness for things to come up to the higher level.
Thank you very much. I actually really appreciated that question because it brought up a lot of side questions which were not immediately in our topic, but which are extremely relevant and extremely tightly related to all the topics we are discussing today. We are intrinsically linked to this planet, to each other, and our behavior is a symptom and maybe the cure for this as well. So there's a lot to reflect on there. It's very unfortunate that we don't have the time that we desire to develop this, because I also have a question from the people who are following us online. And at this point, I would like to invite Azmat Jalil, who is following us online right now, and to please be very brief with your question because the clock is against us a little. Thank you very much. So do we have Azmat joining us, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you raise the volume, please?
Can you hear me now?
I would appreciate some video if you have. Thank you.
Let me see if I can. Can you hear me now?
And we can see you. We can hear you and see you, Azmat. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I will make as brief as I can. Yeah. We have discussed a lot about sustainability and species and environment. In ocean governance, I think the management and safeguard of people working at sea is also very important facet, enshrined also in the UNCLOS, okay, especially Article 73. I would like to bring to attention that issues like criminalization of seafarers and exploitation of fishers is still going on without any abatement. Just to put into context some recent reportings, the recent grounding in July 20th of the bulk carrier Washaiko of Mauritius led to the arrest and detention of master and chief officer for a lengthy period without charges. Then another one, the 26-member crew of tanker Heroic in June were detained in Equatorial Guinea and extradited to Nigeria, where they were charged with oil theft. This has renewed the call on the criminalization of seafarers as well. There are many more such examples which I can't go into it at the time given. Regarding fishers, the UK Guardian newspaper reported a couple of months ago that migrant fishers being physically abused in the UK fishing boats about 35% of migrant fishers, and also being paid about £3 an hour and 20 hours of work per day on average. This is among other forms of exploitation. These issues exist in Thailand, Taiwan, West African, Korean fishing vessels, and so on. So I just wanted to reiterate that when we are talking about ocean governance, this is a facet that we have to address very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing this topic into our discussions today. I don't know if there is anyone from the panel who would like to add a comment to that.
I can say quickly. I won't go into the specific case, but there are instruments under the ILO, the International Labor Organization. You have the 2006 Maritime Labor Convention, and you have the ILO Convention 188. But one of the problems we have with many of these conventions is very low ratification by many states. Okay, that they are not very popular. Many countries are afraid of signing them. We need more signatures, more commitment, and more implementation to make them international. You know, the application of the law will be the principle is flag state. So the law of the ship. Auni may complement this.
Yes.
He's the expert.
Auni, please.
Asmith, I always go back to the original sin. And the original sin is that there is no real jurisdiction and control over the vessels and those operating them. It's an exploitation under the flags of convenience, which the law of the sea has stipulated that there must be a genuine link. And we, to this day, have not asserted that and violated the rights of fishermen and rights of seafarers. And that was exposed by Alistair Cooper. And the world all knows it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think we have, if there is any question from the floor now, we have time for one short one. Yes?
You could go.
Okay.
I have a very
One
short one.
question by a tall person.
Yes. Yeah, I know. It's short and it's even easy, and it's for you, Alan. Yeah. I'm just interested in this survey, this mapping survey that is being carried out right now. What reason does this have? Is this a scientific reason, or is this a possibly exploitation reason? That makes it very different from my view to look at it positively or negatively.
No, it's a very pertinent question. Obviously, knowledge. Obviously, the drive for more knowledge is obviously always commendable. So we should always try to understand the unknown, what is currently the unknown. Then what actually is made of that knowledge, you know, you could always use it for positive things, but there will always be people, obviously, who will use it for commercial exploitation. So, you know, here I'm caught between two stools, because in a way you could say, why do we need to map? Isn't it better, you know, to leave the unknown as it is, so that we don't open a window for exploitation, you know? But still, if it's not done, better to do it, you know, in a transparent manner, because the companies, the private sector, will still do the mapping themselves. And that information, for instance, the oil, I was recently asked to look at a Horizon Europe project in the South Pacific and the South Atlantic, and the partners had to actually go to the Brazilian oil company Petrobras for some maps of the seabed. And that amazed me, because I said, you know, these companies have a lot of information about the seabed. So I would prefer to actually that this exercise is done, you know, in a transparent manner, at least, or in a partly transparent manner, because it can never be completely done, where we have access to the data rather than leaving it completely in the hands of the private entrepreneurs. But yes, that information will eventually be sold. I don't know how it will be done, or leaked, or whatever, you know. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Alan. I think there's something to add over here from David.
Just very quickly, yes, let's hope it's used for peaceful and sustainable purposes, but there are always hidden agendas depending on who finance or fund a particular research. As it was mentioned, I even remember many famous naturalists were even financed by oil companies, so we need to know the reality. And I will say a couple of, one phrase and one historical fact on how to address these things. The phrase is, the only problem with nature is human nature. You know, it's how we can be, how we are. And I'll give an historical example, so how we perceive things. This comes from the conquest of Mexico by Hernan Cortés. He told the Emperor Montezuma on his first meeting if he could help him to find gold. And the reason was that the Europeans had a special disease that could be only cured by gold. So sometimes who's asking you is telling you what the purpose is.
You had a question? Or are there any questions?
The lady, gender balance.
Okay. Sorry, I can't see your hand behind. So I'm afraid this will have to be our last question. Yes, please. Because, yeah.
Thank you
Some
very
people have
much.
flights to
Thanks a
catch, I'm
lot.
sorry.
My question is very short and addressed to David. My question is that in Caribbean area where you were conducting stock assessment, did you reach to a quota allowed to the countries, or that was a different method? Thank you.
Yes, the quota, the stock assessment, one of the objectives to have what are called conservation measures. And among the conservation measures, the quota is one. The other important one are closed seasons. When you can fish, you cannot fish. Again, the complexity in this species is like the life cycle is regional. It spawns in one place, growth in another, it grows. So you have to be very careful where you do it. Yes, the objective will be set a quota and a non-detrimental finding for CITES. And yes, that will be one of the measures. In the only way that you don't have quotas is usually when you only have small-scale fishers, and basically the type of activity they have is considered non-detrimental. This, as I mentioned, is not an industrial activity, thanks God, but in some areas the species has been overfished, so quotas were set. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much for this. I would just like to end this by asking each speaker to make just one summary comment of their presentation. Can we start with you, David?
Do not give up. Please, we need you. You are the new generation. We're trying to help, but it's going to be a big task. It's not going to be easy. We will try to do our best, but we need you more than you need us. So good luck.
It is interrupted, the legacy, but you will change that.
There is nothing wrong with being uncomfortable, and to make someone feel uncomfortable if you have a strange question to ask. So doesn't matter, even if it is a politician or a high-level person or a simple colleague, you know, this is what brings research and debate along. So embrace your being uncomfortable, or if you have a strange question to ask, you know, there is nothing strange or to hide. So let's go for uncomfortableness.
Ambassadors, you've heard this word many times. You've had at least 2 ambassadors on the table today. You need to be ambassadors now, okay? So you need to be IOI's ambassadors, but at the same time, good ocean governance ambassadors. So don't just obviously use this IOI Malta training course, this special seminar, you know, just for your own personal career development, whatever, but also for the greater benefit of the places, of the societies, of the workplace that you are actually engaged in. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think that was a question for us. So first of all, I would like to reiterate the message of our panel, which is that a lot will depend on you going back, taking these messages home, acting upon them, spreading the news, spreading not only maybe this doom and gloom scenario, but also the possibility, the potential that there is in each one of you to bring around the change that we desire, that we need actually, that we need for our survival. So I would like to leave this here with this very strong message of encouragement. Someone mentioned handing over the baton, and there is very much a sense of this with each and every training program that we embark on and that we complete. We start as strangers to each other and we leave as companions in arms in this fight to protect the ocean, to protect our planet, to protect the possibility of our life in a sustainable, equitable, and with a certain, reliable quality to it. So I would like to thank you all for being here today. I recognize again the patience of our Zoom participants who have stayed with us faithfully till now. I apologize I was not able to take more questions from you all, but I hope that this panel has been interesting, has given you new ideas, and has been successful in making you question our central thesis. Ocean governance, a legacy interrupted, yes, no, the jury is still out, and I hope that you'll be playing your part, as we hope will continue to do ours, in achieving our vision for the ocean. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. I call this to a close. Thank you.